It all started when one day, strange gates started appearing all around the world, and even though countless of these gates appeared, they didn't cause any harm to the civilians. Nerds and geeks from all around the world continue to try and make sense of the 20 gates that have appeared but are yet to find any convincing answers. Amidst this chaos, Eugene works diligently for a moving company and is appreciated by the old geezers he works with. The reason he works so hard is to afford college tuition for his younger brother, as after his ogres kicked the bucket, the two of them were left alone. He then shows the old farts a picture of his brother, letting them know about the monster he's packing. On their way back, Eugene seems glad regarding the amount of work they are getting despite it being off-season, and compliments the old folks for their hard work. One of them then points towards a gate and mentions that people are moving so much due to the sudden appearance of gates near their houses. The granny wonders if this could be something good and suggests buying a home near the gate, but gets a reality check from her husband. Eugene then notices that one of the gates has acquired a different color when it's supposed to be more bluish. Suddenly their truck comes to a stop and Eugene decides to check out the issue, only to find a monstrous bird sitting on top of the truck. It tries attacking Eugene, but he manages to dodge and realizes that the old folks are still inside the truck. However, this is not the only one, as countless other monsters are seen flying around as well. Apparently, these gates are portals to other dimensions called dungeons, and when they remain uncleared, the monsters pop out of these gates, and that is called a dungeon break. Eugene tries to help the old folks out and witnesses Granny calling that monster the F-word while ripping apart its jaw. Meanwhile, Grandpa notices his wife suddenly becoming more ripped than Mr. Olympia, but even she is as clueless as everyone else as to how it happened. Turns out certain powers are awakened among random individuals that allow them to fight the monsters, and these people are called hunters. On the other hand, a monster is burned alive, and everyone shockingly looks at the person responsible for pulling such a feat. The power that awakened within him looks similar to black fire, and that person turns out to be Eugene's little brother, Yubian, who has now become an S-rank hunter, one of the strongest in the world. It has been 8 years since that incident, and in the present, a hunter named Yumi informs the interviewer about the status window that only hunters can see and showcases her powers to make a tree appear out of nowhere. Before the incident, Yumi was a shut-in NEET but was luckily awakened, which allowed her to save multiple civilians from a collapsing building. This resulted in her finding a job as a hunter and joining a guild to earn some bread. Surprisingly, the minerals found inside the dungeons can fetch a fortune and are known as mana stones. Due to their rarity, it's hard to acquire them except for the S-rank hunters who can easily clear the hardest dungeons. Amongst them, the most popular S-ranker is Eugene's little brother, who established his own build named Haegon and has been rolling in dough ever since. The interviewer wonders if Yumi is built like that as well, but sadly, she is only an E-rank who can barely afford her Netflix subscription. Some days later, that same hunter is eliminated after taking part in a dungeon raid, reminding the world that the high reward of acquiring these powers comes with a high cost as well. Elsewhere, hunters are preparing to raid a dungeon, and one of them complains about bringing a maidenless wimp like Eugene along. The guildmaster asks that guy to stop as they can only afford him with the pocket change salaries they are offering. That hunter then mocks Eugene for being a parasite who has survived every raid, while the rest of his party bites the dust. Furthermore, he begins commenting on how Eugene's little brother abandoned him and didn't even check up on him when he was in the hospital. This results in Eugene getting furious at the hunter for bringing his brother into the conversation, only to get stomped on the ground like a literal ant. That hunter then compliments Eugene for having balls of steel, as an F-rank like Eugene can never beat a D-rank like him. After getting his ass handed to him, the guildmaster uses his powers to put some strength in his jittery legs, as Eugene is still recovering from his previous injury. Following that, he lets Eugene know that an F-rank sometimes has to suck it up, to which Eugene agrees, saying that he is grateful enough to even be offered to participate in a raid. After that, the guildmaster smacks the other hunter for bullying the weakling, while Eugene uses his abilities to bring the guildmaster named Silku under his custody without him noticing. With that being said, everyone enters the dungeon gate. As soon as they enter the dungeon, Eugene's party is attacked by bat monsters, but they easily manage to take care of them, laughing at themselves for being scared of these things when the dungeon break happened 8 years ago. The corpses of those monsters also leave behind crystals that are worth a few grand. That arrogant hunter advises Yujin to crank up his Minecraft skills, as they will be taking 80% of the profit along with the crystals that Yujin mines, leaving only the remaining 20% for him. Hearing this makes Yujin feel like Cinderella, who is treated like a servant, and reminds him of when Yuyun left their house after his awakening, and while Yujin was drafted into the military, his younger brother formed his own guild, and just like that, he was left behind. This resulted in him making a deal with a broker to forcefully awaken himself, only to be granted an F rank. His embarrassingly low rank made him a laughingstock with a load of debt. Even his own brother mocked him for receiving the skill of a custodian, as if he was the one who raised in his rank when all he did was drag Yuyun down. But this was not all, as Yujin ended up breaking his legs and Yuyun refused to provide him with healers, as this way, his older brother could finally stop disappointing him. However, Yujin doesn't blame Yuyun for abandoning a good-for-nothing loser who is trying to freeload off his younger brother. Furthermore, the only reason an F rank like him could survive for so long is due to his ability called Custodian. This allows him to take custody of people around him, including his brother and all the people he manages to grow close with. The magical words "hang in there" are what activates the skill, and once they are under his custody, he can buff their stats. But this isn't the real reason behind his survival, as Yujin isn't particularly lucky or anything. Apparently, there is another skill that came along with the Custodian skill that is named the Final Thanks. This skill transfers the skills and stats of his target to Yujin at double effectiveness. Suddenly, Yujin senses the stats of Suku being transferred to his body, making him panic. Even though the effect of this transfer only lasts for a small amount of time, the main point to notice is that it's only transferred when the target has lost their life. Just then, Yujin witnesses a pool of blood along with Suku's lifeless body on the ground. But this isn't all, as there is also a three-headed dragon chonking down that hunter's disgusting-looking body. This dragon is called Rochidus, and as a Tier 1 dragon, it has been determined to be undefeated. Yujin can't understand how such a high-level monster is roaming a D-rank dungeon and uses Suku's abilities to buff his legs and begins running toward the exit despite the injury. But just when he is about to reach the exit, the dragon attacks him with its tail and blocks the exit, trapping him inside. The dragon then roars and attacks the pathetic weakling, sending him flying and crashing onto the ground. Yujin begins bleeding, and while the dragon moves towards him, Suku's final memories begin to enter his mind. He then figures that his vegetable legs are in no shape to get him out and wonders if it is the end. The dragon roars again and is about to end his life when Yuyun attacks the dragon and saves Yujin. Yuyun advises Yujin to stay back, but he lets his younger brother know that it's impossible for him to fight the dragon as it has 3 heads. However, he ignores Yujin's warning and activates his skill named Blue Willows, followed by his dashing toward the dragon and attacking its head. Yuyun then takes out his sword and stabs one of its head, surprising Yujin as he realizes the difference between him and this rank. The dragon then attacks Yuyun with acid, and Yujin advises him to dodge as it has the ability to curse him. Luckily, Yuyun manages to defend himself and Yujin using his shield, but some of the drops fall on his body. Taking advantage of the opening, he attacks the dragon once again and notices his sword breaking apart due to the effects of poison. Yujin notices that Yuyun's movements seem constrained and wonders if it is because he is trying to protect him. But Yuyun instantly clears this misunderstanding by mocking Yujin for going back into a dungeon and blames him for all the deaths of his party. Furthermore, he tells Yujin to learn his place and work as a civil servant or something. Hearing this makes Yujin disappointed, and he gets up, saying that Yuyun was just worried that he would be slowing him down again. He then blames himself for believing that Yuyun came to save him. Following that, Yujin takes out his dollar store lightsaber, telling Yuyun that there is an easier way to solve all his problems. He then runs towards the dragon, stabs it on the leg and lets go of his sword, telling Yuyun that he just slowed him down, so it's better to let him die. The dragon doesn't wait a moment to attack Yujin, and he closes his eyes to prepare for the worst. At the same time, Yuyun dashes towards him to attack the dragon, causing an explosion. After the dust settles, blood starts dripping, and Yujin notices Yuyun lying next to him with deadly wounds on his back. Yujin asks Yuyun if he is alright and questions why he would do such a thing. The dragon's head begins burning thanks to the previous attack, while Yuyun, coughing blood, lets Yujin know that the dragon will fall into slumber in an hour, advising him to escape the dungeon when it happens. Meanwhile, Yujin wonders why the brother who hated him this much is going to such lengths for him. Yuyun then gives him a gate stone that he can use to escape the dungeon, but Yujin suggests doing something about his wounds first. However, Yuyun replies that it is already too late for him and rests on Yujin's shoulder, departing from the world. This results in the skill Final Thanks activating and transferring his brother's powers to Yujin at double effectiveness. At the same time, the dragon recovers from Yuyun's previous attack and begins walking towards them. Meanwhile, Yujin gives Yuyun a final hug and begins feeling his powers flowing through his body. He then takes out a spear and gets on his feet, attacking the dragon's head, mocking it for being too slow as he severs one of its 3 heads. Yuyun's memories begin flooding his mind, and he witnesses Yuyun wanting to stay away from Yujin as his enemies could target him, thinking that Yujin is Yuyun's vulnerability. As Yujin continues to dash toward the dragon and go for another attack, he further witnesses Yuyun cursing his lackeys for allowing Yujin to get hurt, ordering them to take out all his enemies. At that time, all he could do was give Yujin some dough, while begging him to stay away from the dungeons. Eventually, Yujin manages to take down the dragon and begins tearing up after finding out the truth. Just then, a notification pops up, congratulating Yujin for slaying the dragon. He is then given several rewards along with a wish stone that could grant any wish. At first, he wishes to get famous amongst the baddies, but is told to know his place. Yujin then wonders if he should wish to become a powerful hunter, but in the end, he wishes to turn back time to before his brother's death. This results in the crystal accepting Yujin's wish, confirming for the last time. When Yujin agrees, the crystal starts glowing and sends Yujin back to the past. After figuring out that he is at Yuyun's guild headquarters, Yujin checks the date and realizes that he traveled 5 years back in the past. Just then, Yuyun appears in the room, and without wasting a second, he runs at him and gives his little brother the biggest hug. Following that, he begins apologizing to Yuyun, admitting that it was all his fault and sympathizing with Yuyun for having such a hard time because of him. In the end, he promises to behave from now on, and Yuyun hugs him back, thanking him for saying all that. Suddenly, a pop-up notification appears, giving him the title of Dragon Slayer and Perfect Custodian. Additionally, he receives a skill named Super Nanny that will allow Yuyun to grow at twice the speed under his custody. Afterward, Yuyun begins preparing dinner for Yujin while he sits there awkwardly. Before he went back in time, this was the day the two of them had a big fight, but now, everything seems to be okay and much better than before. Yujin then decides to check his status window and notices the Dragon Slayer title. He taps on it, resulting in 4 more skills appearing. One of them is an L-grade resistance that makes him immune to all sorts of poisons. This makes him wonder if he is following some Jinwu's path, and begins imagining himself saving Yuyun from that dragon and showcasing his skills, making Yuyun's brother complex reach new heights. However, when he checks his stats, all of them are still as low as possible, which makes him realize that he's still a lowly F rank. Thinking that the L rank stands for being a loser, he notices that his dexterity and intelligence have improved along with the custodian ability, which now has some new skills. One of them is called Super Nanny, which boosts the growth of the target for 3 words. The second one is called Who's a Good Boy, which boosts the target's ability based on the number of people Yujin cheers his little brother in front of. Using this skill, he can boost Yuyun's guild's reputation, making him rich in the process. However, the keyword turns out to be I love you, which is something he can't say to everyone as it won't be long till the FBI knocks on his door. Moving forward, he looks at the next skill called As the Twig is Bent, So Grows the Tree. This skill lets him see the potential grade of an unawakened individual. With that being said, the dinner is ready and Yuyun presents some of the dishes he cooked in front of Yujin. After taking a bite, Yujin finds Yuyun's cooking to be quite tasty and compliments his little brother, making him overjoyed. He is surprised to see Yuyun cooking when his loaded ass can always order something. But the reason he cooks is to stay away from poisons, as many other guild leaders are doing their best to somehow bring him down. This results in Yujin confronting Yuyun for not telling him about this earlier. Following that, Yuyun lets him know that he regrets trying to get away from Yujin to keep him safe and didn't say anything as he didn't want to burden him. But now he is aware of his mistake, as Yujin still cares deeply about his little brother and appreciates him being so kind when Yuyun has been so tough on him. Nonetheless, the two of them continue to eat dinner while Yujin seems glad that he went back in time. Soon after, it's time for Yuyun to go to work, and before leaving, he makes sure that Yujin deletes the broker's contact. Yujin decides to leave as well, but Yu-Yeon mentions that he'll not be going anywhere as he has to stay with him and is banned from going outside. Yujin questions Yu-Yeon about why he can't go outside, to which he replies it's pretty dangerous, as the two of them are close again, which is why he isn't safe any longer. If he walks outside, he can be eliminated anytime, which is why he's going to have to stay inside the house. However, Yujin decides to bolt out when out of nowhere. The moving company appears with all his stuff as Yu-Yeon asks them to empty Yujin's place. When he tries to argue, Yu-Yeon replies that Yujin told him that he loves him, which is basically the same as agreeing to all of this. Later, he lies around the house and makes up his mind to do a prison break. But as soon as he opens the door, Yujin finds a buffed-out dude standing outside. That dude turns out to be the A-ranker named Sungin, who is Yu-Yeon's right-hand man. Sungin stops him from going outside as he is ordered by Yu-Yeon to do so. Yujin tries to negotiate, but it doesn't work as it only makes the A-ranker even more furious. Yujin begins pissing his pants and starts feeling like a rabbit in front of an enraged bear. But at the perfect point, a skill named Resist Fear activates, removing all the fear and making Sungin seem like a mascot character. This results in Yujin growing some balls and arguing with Sungin about how removing his freedom is against the law. As expected, it doesn't work and Sungin threatens to toss him inside like a bowling ball. But in the nick of time, the skill named Twig is activated, allowing Yujin to look at Sungin's stats, finding out that he can become an S rank and stand side by side with Yu-Yeon. However, in order to unlock his full potential, the Super Nanny skill is needed, and by doing that, he will be able to tame this wild beast. After gathering some courage, Yujin says I love you to Sungin and makes some zesty ass lines, creeping the poor guy out as he tosses Yujin inside. Eventually, Yu-Yeon returns home and checks on his brother, who is lifeless at this point. Yu-Yeon reassures him that he'd be able to go out once they become more powerful, but for now, he needs to have a bodyguard, making him feel like a pet dog on a leash. This makes Yujin remember that he already knows about the people who will be awakened in the future. By convincing them to become hunters and making them his bodyguards, Yujin can build his own faction. With that being said, Yujin lets Yu-Yeon know that he'd find himself his own A-rank bodyguard, or maybe even an S-rank. Yu-Yeon wonders how Yujin will find one and figures that he actually got awakened. He then questions Yujin about his skills, and realizing that Yu-Yeon would most definitely become even harder on him, Yujin decides to lie and says that he can predict a person's rank. Yu-Yeon calms down as it is a pretty useless skill and mentions that the government will be setting up awakening centers soon anyway. Eventually, he allows Yujin to find himself an A-ranker, but only if he stays at his apartment. The next day, he visits the Hunter Registration Center, where everyone is surprised to see the famous Sungin protecting a scrawny loser. They begin to wonder if Yujin is a new S rank, only to be disappointed after finding out that he is only an F. Yujin remembers that Yu-Yeon gave him money to buy some equipment and pays the shops a visit. There they offer him some iced out stuff, but he decides to buy something simpler instead, which ends up ramping him up to C rank. After returning, Sungin confronts Yujin for going shopping without informing him, and Yujin lets him know about the place he wants to visit. Apparently, he wants to scout Yerim, who works at a barbecue shop and is supposed to become an A rank 3 years from now. Eventually, the two of them arrive at the shopping district, where Yujin begins asking around about Yerim, but no one seems to know her. Sungin questions why he is at this market, when there are a lot of barbecue shops near the guild, to which he replies that there is a strong presence at this place. Their conversation is interrupted by a girl shouting at someone and running away from the shop. She bumps into Yujin on her way out, and he instantly realizes that she is the one and only Yerim. Yujin hands Sungin his half-eaten corn dog and begins running after her. He uses his newly purchased item to boost his speed, zooming through the street while realizing that pay to win is the way to go. After running around for a while, he manages to find Yerim, but when he tries to stop her, she thinks of Yujin as one of her uncle's lackeys and decides to ignore him. Just then, a car rushes towards her. Luckily, Yujin manages to save her in the nick of time, shocking the driver along with everyone present at the scene. He asks Yerim if she is okay, disappointed that he didn't land a more heroic pose. Yerim questions if Yujin is a hunter, and Yujin plans to explain everything once she gets off of him. Following that, the two of them decide to enjoy some barbecue, and Yujin seems glad that he brought the corporate card, as this girl sure eats like a pig. He then wonders why she doesn't eat at her uncle's barbecue shop, and she suggests he stay away from that nasty place. Yerim then asks Yujin what the big brother of Yuhyun wants from her, to which he replies that he felt a great force within her. Instantly, she decides to leave until Yujin makes up a story about her parents helping him before they passed away, which is why he wants to repay the debt. Surprisingly, she buys this story and decides to hear him out. Yujin then lets her know that he noticed her having the potential of becoming at least a B ranker, and with the Heian Guild backing him up, she can jumpstart her career as a hunter. Furthermore, he asks her to sign a contract and makes the terms and conditions appear out of nowhere. This shocks Yerim, but he lets her know that she'd have these powers once she became a hunter as well. The terms include her joining the Heian Guild and becoming Yujin's bodyguard for a year. Yerim wonders why a geezer like him wants to be protected by someone younger, and Yujin reassures her that she'd be much stronger than him after she awakens. Yerim asks if she can live on her own, and when he agrees, she instantly decides to sign the contract, but Yujin stops her and advises her to read the whole thing carefully and include her terms as well. He then begins teaching her about everything one needs to do before signing a contract, emphasizing the importance of a guardian, but she questions what one is supposed to do when their guardian is the one ripping them off. Just then, her uncle appears and begins yelling at Yerim to come back and finish her shift. But Yujin ends up grabbing the uncle's arm, surprising him as the twig has more strength than it seems. He then notices Yerim's shoes and mentions how she's better off without her uncle. She instantly agrees and comments on how he took all the money she inherited from her and never gave her a penny. All the customers end up hearing what she said, making the uncle mad, which results in him shoving Yujin aside and walking towards Yerim when suddenly Yujin falls onto the ground, shocking both Yerim and her fat-ass uncle. Turns out he felt to blame the uncle for beating him for no reason. When the uncle tries to argue, Yujin begins crying, asking if he'd beat the girl like Yerim the same way. This results in the old fart grabbing Yujin's collar, and Yujin hits his foot, making him face first onto the food. Yujin continues to stuff the barbecue up his nostrils while Yerim can barely control her laugh. Just when he begins to threaten her uncle for ripping off her niece, they hear a loud bang. Yerim thinks that it was Yujin who made the sound, but he figures that it came from outside. Suddenly, everything begins shaking and Sungin appears, informing Yujin about the monster that appeared on the street. Apparently, it is due to a dungeon break, and Sungin advises them to run away while he uses his powers to hold back the monster. With that being said, he creates a shield to protect everyone from the monster while Yujin thinks of how he doesn't remember anything similar happening in the past. Following that, Sungin dashes towards the monster, leaps and lands a kick on its head, but isn't able to deal much damage and ends up getting whipped by its tentacles. Everyone starts to run for their lives, and Yerim accidentally falls onto the ground, and instead of helping her, his uncle abandons Yerim and runs away. Just when the monster is about to attack her, Yujin manages to shield her with a table, and the two of them begin running towards a shelter. This superhero awe moment makes Yerim feel butterflies in her stomach. Eventually, they arrive at the underground shelter, but Yujin refuses to go inside as he needs to go back. He has seen that monster before and knows that this sort of monster needs to be taken out at once. Sungin is a defense-based hunter and isn't really good at attacking. However, Yerim asks Yujin to awaken her powers so she can fight along. But he refuses to do so as he wants to awaken her powers in a safe way and can't let a kid like her fight all by herself. He then advises her to go inside the shelter and dashes away, while constantly thinking of ways he can deal with that monster. After reaching the battle site, he advises Sungin to use his shield skills, but when Sungin argues that it won't be enough, he reassures him that it will be, as he's got a plan in mind. After that, the two of them stand on top of Sungin's barrier, looking down at the monster. He then begins using his abilities to trap the monsters inside his barrier. This surprises him as he never thought of using his skills like this. Following that, Yujin begins running on top of the barrier, remembering the venom pods he bought from the shop earlier. Right now, he plans to throw one of these at the monster and close the barrier. But just when he is about to execute this plan, Yujin notices that the barrier is empty. Turns out that the monster slipped down the sewer and grabbed Yujin's leg, dangling him in the air like a rag doll. Just then, Yerim appears with an umbrella in hand and begins beating the monster with it. This lets it let go of Yujin, and the two of them begin running away while confronting each other for fighting that monster. He lets her know that she is still pretty young, but this is the exact reason why she wants her own powers. Earlier, being saved by Yujin made her happy, but at the same time, angry since she couldn't protect herself. This is why she wishes to become strong and not remain a helpless brat. Yerim then asks Yujin to teach her how to become strong as according to him, she has potential. Out of nowhere, the monster lunges at them and an explosion full of ice occurs. Sungin looks from afar with a factor of surprise on his face as Yerim uses her newly formed ice abilities to protect herself. Overjoyed, she lets Yujin know that she got an S rank. However, the fight is not over as the monster grabs her hands and in a state of panic. Yerim punches the monster and makes a pulp out of it. Seeing how strong she is makes Yerim confident, and she borrows a metal rod from Sungin, using it to attack the monster, although allowing some chunks to hit the background characters. She then uses another one of her skills and dashes into the monster, ripping it apart into pieces. The flesh rains down on those two while Yujin yells at her to take it easy. Yerim apologizes as she is not used to these powers, and Yujin thinks how someone who used to be called the Ice Witch is now such a cheerful kid. Furthermore, he wishes Yerim had some kind of wide Ronge attack to take care of the other monster when unexpectedly Union appears and sets every single one of the monsters on fire. Yerim is surprised to see him deal with the monsters with just one hit, and while the burning flesh falls onto the ground, Yuyan stares at Yerim, who is currently flying in the air. Yuji wonders if his little bro came to save him, but Yuyan begins yelling at Yujin for getting himself into dangerous situations. But he reassures Yuyan that he has someone to keep him safe and introduces Yerim, the new S-ranker. Meanwhile, Yerim is kind of shocked as she didn't think Yuyan really is Yujin's brother. Yuyan then questions if Yerim's parents agreed to that, to which Yujin hesitantly replies that he is thinking about becoming her legal guardian. Yerim wonders if there is a difference between a guardian and a sponsor, and Sungin informs her that a sponsor can't involve himself in her personal affairs, whereas a guardian is almost the same as a parent. Yerim tells Yujin that he doesn't have to go that far, and Yuyan agrees. However, Yujin doesn't allow it for Yujin's safety and snatches him away. He has heard many cases of powerful kids bullying their guardians and thinks Yerim might exploit his worthless F-ranked brother. But when Yerim disagrees, saying she wouldn't do such a thing, Yuyan suggests he becomes her guardian instead. Yerim straight up refuses, and the two of them begin arguing with each other. Yuyan begins taking Yujin away, but Yerim grabs his arm with a little too much strength, dislocating his calcium-deficient arm. This results in both of them starting to panic, and Yuyan offers to call his healers but instead gets yelled at about how he should be grateful that a new S-ranker is going to join his guild. Furthermore, Yujin asks him to clean up after himself along with Sungin, who is waiting for him. After Yuyan goes away, Yerim begins bad-mouthing him for being a clueless jerk. However, Yujin tells her to stay away or she might send him to a hospital, and she begins apologizing. Following that, he picks her shoes and puts them on for her, deciding to buy her the freshest Jordans the next day. Yerim mentions how this scene looks like a rom-com, and she notices a fly but accidentally hits Yujin instead of the fly, making him wary of the devious girl. Afterward, he lets her know that he only wants to protect her, because he had been in her shoes when his folks passed away, leaving the two of them alone. Yerim reassures him that he'd do just fine, and that she looks forward to their arrangement. Yujin also replies that he might not love her as much as her parents, but he still loves her. This results in Yerim laughing out loud, not knowing the custody effect activated due to the keywords. Suddenly, the fat-ass uncle comes running back, saying that he was worried about Yerim, wondering if she was awakened. Yerim replies that she's now an S-ranker, and her uncle gets overjoyed until Yerim mentions that she'd be moving in with Yujin. Her uncle starts to argue about her still being a kid, but Yujin lets him know that hunters are allowed to live on their own when they become a teenager. He begins arguing even more but shuts it down when Yujin shows him a voice recording of the fight before the monster attacks. The two of them begin to argue at each other, and Yerim listens to them quietly until her uncle throws away Yujin's phone and begins assaulting him. This results in Yerim smashing down the umbrella she is holding between them, followed by her making the most innocent puppy face and mentioning that the fatty shouldn't be using violence. After that, she rips the umbrella in half when he tries to argue, blaming him for everything that happened, while the uncle begins fearing for his life after seeing the monstrosity in front of him. Fear resistance keeps Yujin from wetting his pants while she crumples the umbrella, letting her uncle know that he could be in the same condition if he wants. However, she decides to let it go as the geezer isn't worth her time. Yerim then threatens him to never disturb Yujin again or he'd find himself in a worse condition than that poor umbrella. After leaving her uncle in a state of shock, Yerim walks away, proud of her intimidating aura. The next morning, Yuyan barges inside Yujin's room and asks him to hand over the stuff he bought yesterday. Yujin thinks that the cheapskate wants his money back, but Yuhyun only wants the venom pods, and after retrieving them, he gives Yujin a big hug. Apparently, he thinks that Yujin wanted to eliminate himself to keep the enemies from threatening his younger brother, advising him to not take such drastic measures as he promises to always protect Yujin no matter what. On their way out, Yuhyun informs Yujin that the director of their guild paid her uncle a visit and made him sign a settlement saying he'd never try to contact her ever again. Additionally, she'll not sue him for stealing her inheritance, but it doesn't matter as Yurim will earn a load of bread anyway. They then walk towards the training room and find it in a rather critical condition, even though it was designed to handle attacks of an S-ranker. Yurim lands on the floor and smashes a boxing bag into pieces, followed by her using an ability named Shadowless Day. While Yujin wonders if Yurim is doing okay, he notices something black appearing under him. That thing then begins wrapping around random stuff including Yujin's body. After stopping her foot on the ground, Yurim dashes forward and punches the floor, cracking the walls due to the extraordinary force. She then hears Yuhyun's voice and notices Yujin's soulless body on the ground. Yurim tries to check up on him, but he doesn't recognize her due to her new look. Apparently, Haeyeon's styling team turned her into a straight-up baddie, because she will be appearing on television and stuff. Furthermore, she has also finished the paperwork and is writing down her skills. Her first skill is called Frosty Sigh, which freezes stuff. The second one is the Sandals of Hermes that let her fly. Additionally, the Shadowless Day allows her to swallow the target's shadow and add their powers to her buff. The last one is called Pale Corpse, which lets her extract information from dead bodies, which she isn't really a fan of. This results in Yujin advising her to not write about the Pale Corpse, as she needs to keep a few tricks up her sleeves. Hearing him talk expertly makes Yurim compliment Yujin. Yuhyun gets jealous and asks her to step away, resulting in an argument between the two. Later that day, Yurim pulls up to the Hunter Association where a ton of people are gathered to watch her. Meanwhile, Yujin cheers for her from the shadows, looking like a creepy stalker. Sungin wonders why he didn't tag along, and Yujin replies that she'd hardly miss a disgusting loser like him after getting used to being a superstar. However, he is still glad that the Ice Witch has now become a cheerful, outgoing teenager. He then realizes that the future seems to be changing and decides not to worry about it now. Afterward, he begins looking at the ranks of everyone present and can't seem to find a good one until he suddenly bolts towards someone. After locking that person in his sight, Yujin manages to grab his arm, confusing that guy who is unaware of his potential to become a double S-ranker. Yujin calls him Manhwa and acts as if the two of them know each other. Manhwa apologizes for not remembering him, to which Yujin replies that he can't blame him as it's been ages. He then takes a look at Manhwa's skill, which is named Master of the Golden Smithy. It is a double S-rank crafting skill, and equipment made by him could cost a fortune. This is why he needs to unlock Manhwa's skill and use it to secure some dough. Manhwa then lets him know that his current rank is F, and Yujin asks Manhwa to take basic training with him. But Manhwa refuses because it requires money and he is broke. Yujin reassures him that he can make it happen for free, only for Sungin to confront him, as hunter training is only for guild members. Manhwa is surprised to see Sungin and wonders if Yujin knows him. But after finding out that Yujin is actually Yuhyun's older brother, he finds it difficult to handle his aura. Following that, he promises to put a good word for Manhwa and mentions that he only wants to help as Manhwa is a great guy. Seeing someone being so kind to him brings tears to Manhwa's eyes, and he begins bawling. Later that day, Yujin offers him some coffee and Manhwa apologizes for causing a scene earlier. Additionally, he lets Jinwoo know that he used to be good at building stuff in his childhood, but couldn't really build his GPA all that much, resulting in him becoming a jobless NEET. One thing led to another, and now he is in a bunch of debt. Coincidentally, Yujin knows this feeling, as he used to be a broke F-ranker as well. He then gets up, telling Manhwa to screw those people and not worry about what others have to say. During this pep talk, Yujin sneaks in those 3 magical words, bringing Manhwa under his custody as well. But sadly, the director of the Haeyeon Guild, Shinyoung, flat out refuses to give Manhwa free training. They'd only offered training to skillful people and not failures like Manhwa. Furthermore, Shinyoung knows that Yujin has a keen eye for talent and brought Yurim, but that could be a fluke in Shinyoung's eyes. Manhwa realizes that Yujin is being humiliated because of him and decides to leave. Having no other choice, Yujin decides to call Yuhyun, but Manhwa asks him not to, as even this much help was enough to motivate him. Just then, a black sus-looking van pulls up and Manhwa mentions that they are here to pick him up. From inside, some Yakuza type of men emerge, telling Manhwa that he needs to repay his debt, while Yujin figures that it doesn't seem like a very honest job. Those guys then snatch some money out of Manhwa's hands, letting him know that he still has to pay a lot more. Yujin questions where they are taking Manhwa, which those guys don't really appreciate. Having no other choice, he decides to tag along and finds himself inside the van along with a few sweaty dudes. Yujin asks Manhwa why he had to borrow money from them, and he replies that the bank was not willing to give him a loan. One of them asks Yujin if he is a hunter, to which he agrees, elaborating that he and Manhwa are childhood friends. The other guy invites Yujin to mine some mana stones for them, saying that they don't discriminate against F-rankers. Eventually, he agrees while knowing full well that he'd be forced to sign a mining contract. Yujin knows well how they rip off F-rank miners while not paying any attention to their safety. This makes him realize that Manhwa has been doing this all this time as well. Soon after, they arrive at the guild and Yujin tries his best to stay positive all along the way but gets kicked on his back as soon as they enter the room. While he recovers from the kick, they begin beating Manhwa and let Yujin know that he can't leave until they say so. Manhwa begins apologizing to Yujin, but before he can reply, they make him sit on the couch and sign the mining contract, saying that they'll give him a 20% cut. Apparently the contract is specifically for hunters, and if he breaches the terms, he'd be struck with a D-rank curse. Seeing them force Manhwa to do the same, Yujin asks the guys to let him compare his contract with Manhwa's. They all begin to laugh and hand over Manhwa's contract to him. After taking a look, he finds out that Manhwa only receives 10% due to his debt. Yujin calls it a slave contract and rips it apart in front of them. Luckily, the curse gets nullified due to his skill, and Yujin uses this opportunity to kick one of them in the face. This makes them realize that Yujin could not be an F rank, as he knocks the guild master out cold. This results in the others preparing to fight him, and as they dash towards the two of them, Yujin calls someone on his phone, and that person turns out to be Sungun. Suddenly he appears, tearing apart the door behind Yujin. Sungun starts off by punching the fatty whale in his guts, sending him flying in the air and crashing onto the floor. Manhwa wonders how this all happened, and Yujin lets him know that he called Sungun while they were in the van and made sure to narrate where they were being taken. Meanwhile, Sungun continues to knock out the other two, and one of them takes out the dollar store knife. He dashes towards Sungun and manages to land a hit, only to realize that the knife did nothing to his divine abs. Sungun then flicks his finger and slams that dude on the floor. Just then, one of them recognizes Sungun as the A-ranker, suddenly becoming as obedient as little puppies. He then asks Yujin about what to do with them, and Yujin wants to have an eye for an eye. He puts an S-rank contract in front of them, saying that it's a 50-year contract where they'd only get 10% of the profits. But when they begin to complain, Yujin scatters all the contracts they made with F-rankers that he found in the cabinet. However, after not seeing a bit of remorse on the guild master's face, Yujin kicks him in the face for not using F-rankers like expendable tools. This surprises both Manhwa and Sungun, while Yujin mentions that he'd like to throw them all in an A-rank dungeon. This makes the fatty apologize and ask for a lighter punishment, as 50 years is way too long. Yujin replies that they shouldn't have trouble getting punished as they are now aware of their crimes. On their way back, Sungun reports to his higher-ups about the incident, while Manhwa thanks Yujin for saving him twice already. He then begins crying and gives Yujin a hug. Later, he somehow managed to get a dorm room from Shimyum and gave it to Manhwa. Yujin then asks Manhwa if he knows how to clean and cook, as only housekeepers are allowed to stay in the dorm, and he'd need to pretend to be Yujin's housekeeper. However, Yujin figures that it might be a little too much, but instead, Manhwa begins tearing up and hugs him for being such an awesome friend. Soon after, Manhwa ends up passing out while Yujin decides to move his stuff to this dorm when he finds Sungun standing outside the door. Yujin wonders if he is grounded again, but Sungun replies that he came to pick him up for something else, asking him to come along. Sungun ends up bringing Yujin to a rather fancy restaurant and scares the waiter with his big menacing body. Everybody begins thinking of him as a gangster, and after taking a seat, Yujin begins to wonder why a guy his age brought him to such a hip-looking place. Sungun advises Yujin to enjoy himself, and he questions the topic he wants to discuss. To start things off, Sungun pours Yujin some drink and mentions that at first he used to hate him, but as time passed, he realized that Yujin is a decent man. He came back to help Sungin during the dungeon break, took care of Yerim's family issues, and even saved Manhwa from those wannabe gangsters. This is why Sungin feels like he can trust Yujin, unaware of his real purpose. But Yujin realizes that this is a great opportunity to bond with Sungin and begins acting friendly. Sungin then wonders if Yujin was trying to expose that broker the other day, and Yujin hesitantly agrees. Yujin then begins complaining about his overprotected brother, but Sungin can relate as he has a similar background. Apparently, he was raised by his grandfather and awakened his powers while protecting him from a monster. Yuyan also made sure Sungin could support his grandfather and even recruited a healer from abroad for them, which makes him think that Yuyan deeply cares about family bonds. As they continue to drink, Sungin is surprised at how well Yujin is able to hold his liquor, and Yujin disagrees, only to notice the number of bottles he has finished. This makes him realize that it's thanks to the poison-resistant skills, causing him to think that he'd never get drunk anymore. Yujin then begins pressing the poison-resistant skill button and manages to turn it off, instantly making him drunk and knocking him out cold. The next morning, Yujin wakes up in his room and finds Sungin with a wash basin in front of him. The sight of a muscle head first thing in the morning freaks Yujin out, and he notices that Sungin has already come into his custody. This comes as a shock, as he doesn't remember anything that happened last night. However, Sungin decides to take care of him and appears all sparkly, creeping the poor soul out even more. Just as Yujin is about to say that he's not into Sungin, he is given kudzu juice to recover from his hangover. He then begins massaging his feet and brings him a potty bowl as well. But after realizing that Yujin doesn't remember anything, Sungin lets him know that after he passed out, Yujin held his hand and in a very serious tone told him that he loves him. Thinking that Sungin maybe didn't hear it, he repeated it once again and ended up saying it about 3 dozen times. Yujin begins apologizing to Sungin, but he asks her not to as it makes him happy. Turns out when Yujin repeatedly said that he loved him last night, it reminded Sungin of the time when his grandfather used to get drunk and he had complimented him a lot, making sure to tell him that he loved him before going to bed. For some reason, Yujin reminded him of his grandfather. This comes as a surprise to Yujin, who starts to think that his face matches that of a 70-year-old geezer. Sungin replies that it's not the face, but the fact that he felt safe around him. He then promises to not do such things around others and asks for Yujin's permission to check up on him from time to time. This makes Yujin realize that this is the true effect of custodian, as only hearing those 3 words made Sungin think of him as his grandpa. Furthermore, it must be the same with Yerim, Manhwa, and Yuyan. After Sungin leaves, Manhwa begins to question Yujin about why Sungin was in his room. At the same time, Yerim knocks down the door and is surprised to see Manhwa clinging to Yujin. This makes her furious until Yujin mentions that he is a friend of his, while thinking how the custodian ability allows him to brainwash and control even its rankers. Several days later, Manhwa cooks dinner for the 2 of them, and Yujin compliments him for getting so good in such a short time. Yujin mentions that Yerim will be going on raids too, and she agrees, saying that she'd get rich, buy a mansion for the 2 of them, and won't let the emo boy inside. However, Yujin advises them to get along as they'd be going to boot camp together, making the 2 of them frustrated. Yerim gets mad as she thought it'll be only her and Yujin, while he goes to check the door. Surprisingly, he finds Shimyeon on the door, who informs them about the hunter training program. Turns out he came to pick them up, and as the instructor for the theory exam is running late, they were tossed right into the practicum exam. There, the 3 of them are forced to wipe out an entire fleet of vicious-looking monsters. Both Yujin and Manhwa are terrified of the monsters, while Yerim is as chill as always. Shimyeon mentions that the objective is for them to get used to the presence of monsters. Yerim tells them not to worry as she'll wipe them out as she dashes forward, stabbing some of them while freezing the others to their demise. This makes her wonder if their juicy meat will taste good, while someone questions Shimyeon if it's alright to send so many hunters for basic training. But he thinks it's alright as the F-rankers might not even have to do anything. Amongst the mountain of corpses, a monster emerges and lunges at Manhwa. In a state of panic, Manhwa lets go of his weapon and begins running away. But just when the monster is about to beat his ass, Yujin manages to save him, advising Manhwa to never let go of his weapon. While Yujin gets ready to fight back, Shimyeon wonders how he will tackle this situation, and considering how knowledgeable Yujin is and his contract with Yerim, makes him think that he is hiding something. Meanwhile, Manhwa compliments him for not getting scared, as if he has been fighting monsters for years. Yujin realizes that his cover might be blown if he eliminates the monster and decides to act like a noob, tossing his weapon aside and being chomped on by the monster, making Shimyung's suspicions go away. After the training, Yurim is glad that she could use her skills to the fullest while Manhwa apologizes for being such a pathetic loser. Yurim uses this chance to compare herself to Manhwa when Shimyung appears, congratulating them for surviving the basic practicum. He calls Yurim's skills impressive, Hume ignoring the other two F-rankers. Furthermore, he informs them that the theory classes will start tomorrow and introduces their teacher Haein. Yujin instantly recognizes her as one of the most authoritative voices when it comes to dungeon studies, and that she is mostly known as Dr. White. This makes Haein impressed as not many people know her by that name. Following that, she praises Yujin for being as knowledgeable as her uncle has told her about. Finding out that Shimyung is Haein's uncle comes as a shock, and she lets him know that she'd be staying at the guild for some time, making Yujin wonder if his life as a loner is finally coming to an end. Elsewhere, Yuvyun and Sunghyun are in the dungeon where they successfully eliminate a giant monster. However, that's not the only thing, as they end up finding its little cub, wondering what to do with it. Apparently, when the dungeons appeared for the first time, humanity's initial reaction was similar to when cavemen discovered fire. Half of them filled with awe, while the other half with curiosity. But soon after, monsters started to emerge from the gate. It was then when awakened ones came to save the world while scientists found ways to use mana stones as sources of energy. Simultaneously, every country established associations to manage hunters, and in Korea, most of them work in mega guilds. This is everything that Yujin is learning in his first theory class. He finds out that Haein is not only hot but also a great teacher. While Haein says that skills are given as a mechanism for self-defense, Yujin remembers that Yumi got her skills similar to how her environment was. Haein notices Yujin's confused face and asks if there is a problem. He ends up telling her that maybe skills don't manifest as a means of self-defense, but something else entirely. Haein begins thinking about it, and before Yujin can say anything further, she holds onto his hands, impressed by the fact that he's been tracking the latest skill manifestations. She suggests meeting over for a cup of coffee, but to get out of the sticky situation, he asks Yurin to ask some questions. As expected, the question she asks is about the dough S-rankers make. Haein takes out her money gun and mentions that S-rank hunters make around $10 million a year, and it's well-deserved as S-rankers are pretty rare. They not only risk their lives fighting monsters but also bring mana stones of astronomical value. Later, Yujin is surprised by the fact that Yuyeon brought the baby monster home as he wants to tame it. After taking a look, Yujin realizes that the monster Yuyeon brought is so dangerous that even S-rankers find it hard to fight it without a team. However, Yuyeon is not sure if the baby is tameable and whips out a gem named Mark of the Master that makes the target accept its master. He then uses it to order the cub to come down, but it manages to resist the effect and makes a jump. Yuyeon tells Yujin to be careful and attacks it with fire, but the cub remains unscratched as it's immune to fire and lands a kitty paw punch on Yuyeon. Eventually, he manages to catch it and tosses it inside its cage. Yujin wonders if that cub really is tameable, and Yuyeon replies that he won't get his hopes up and will have to eliminate it if things don't work out. Yujin then begins seeing the cub's rank and skills along with the hint that the cub is not exposed to the keyword. Yujin figures that he can bring the cub under his custody as well, and if it's possible, Yuyeon will become unstoppable. With that being said, he decides to give it a try and tame the cub himself. Monsters became a reality due to dungeons, and while most of them were eliminated, some people managed to tame a few. Mountable monsters were highly sought after as they put the hunter at a great advantage. Furthermore, as the cub can resist fire, it is a perfect mount for Yuyeon, who has a fire skill. If Yujin manages to tame it, not only will Yuyeon become more formidable, Yujin will be awarded a ton of bread. To start things off, Yujin decides to make some food for the cub and finds out that it only eats monster meat with C-grade mana stone, shocking Yujin as one C-grade mana stone costs 7 grand. Even after making dinner for the cub, all Yujin can think about is that it'll take $8 million yearly just to feed the cub. He then wonders if the keywords will work and figures that it might if he just expresses his affection. He then decides to enter the cage and the cub dashes towards him, but Yujin tackles it with his B-rank belt. Apparently he has done quite a lot of pet sitting and knows they love to play tug. After the deadly game of tug, Yujin uses the Mark of the Master, which instantly makes the cub chill out. The custodian skill amplified the effect of the gem, and made the cub feel affection towards Yujin. While playing with the cub, Yuyun tries to grab it, only to get bitten on his hand. Yujin teaches the cub not to bite people and Yuyun advises Yujin to take good care of it. Following that, Yujin goes into his world of delusions, where he tames a bunch of monsters, and is named the Beastmaster Hunter. With that being said, Yujin is about to leave with the monster and Yuyun wonders if he will really live separately. But when he agrees, Yuyun gets a little sad as he wants to spend more time with his big brother. Yujin remembers that Yuyun appreciates family bonds and gives him a pat on the head, letting him know that he's not moving out and will live at both places, promising to hang out more after he's done with basic training. Furthermore, he suggests grabbing a drink after his training as the two of them never had a proper drink together, and Yuyun instantly agrees. Yujin then realizes that he hasn't given the cub a name and decides to name it Peace. The next day, everyone is prepared for the dungeon training when Yerim confronts Yujin for accompanying them to the dungeon, while Yujin sits there looking confused. People begin asking the two S-rankers to pose for a picture, and the reason a guild master is entering a dungeon with newbies. Yuyun replies that S-rankers are pretty rare, so he's trying his best to help Yerim as her employer. Yujin thinks of it as a PR stunt, and thinks about how those two S-rankers make a pretty good team, and it'll be much better when Manhwa and Sungin unlock their S-rank skills as well. Following that, they are asked to borrow the guild's weapons, and Yujin is surprised about the quality of weapons they got. However, they'd need to pay if they broke them, but Yujin advises Manhwa not to fear and to pick the best present. Furthermore, the potions are only for registered guild members, and Yujin asks Yerim to grab as many as she can to share later. She then asks for his help in picking a weapon, and seeing him explain everything so expertly makes Yuyun wonder how his brother is so knowledgeable, only to conclude that he must be researching for his little brother's sake. With that being said, everyone is ready to go inside the dungeon and the gate will only open if they defeat the boss. Yuyun puts a gate stone for emergency situations, even when there are just a few in the country. Meanwhile, Yujin is lost in thought about how he used to work like a dog for pocket change, and now is able to raid the dungeon with the people he cares about. After entering the dungeon, Yerim is surprised by how beautiful it looks when suddenly, Yuyun takes out his sword and uses one of his skills to light the whole scenery on fire. Yerim gets mad at him, thinking that he has a bone to pick with her, but Yujin shows her all the monsters that were burnt due to his attack. Yuyun explains that the first thing one should do after entering the dungeon is secure the surroundings, wondering if she didn't learn this in theory class. She begins making excuses, and Yujin reassures her that she'll learn as she levels up. However, she didn't know one can level up as well. Yujin explains that hunters get a new skill every 10 levels, which is why they are training right now. He then realizes that he can choose the skill Yerim unlocks, and remembering her skill from the past named Pale Rain, he decides to go with that. Afterward, Yerim decides to help Yujin level up, but Yuyun mentions that S rank requires much more points to level up than F rank, followed by him asking her to focus on her own level as he'd help Yujin. This results in Yerim getting furious, and the two of them arguing with each other. Luckily, Yujin breaks the fight, and they begin blaming each other. He then asks them about their duties in this raid, and tells them to focus on them. After hearing her guardian and his big brother yelling at them, they decide to work together for the time being, even when their heart says otherwise. Just then, more monsters appear and both of them dash towards them to help Yujin and begin bullying those poor things. Meanwhile, in another dimension, unknown beings begin discussing how they can only interact with Yujin in the dungeon, saying that they're waiting for his sorry ass to appear. Following that, Yerim attacks a bunch of goat monsters and freezes them so Yujin can finish them off, while Yuyun also fries them to a crisp, forming a mountain of corpses in front of the F-rankers. Yujin begins picking mana stones as they cost a fortune, and then advises Manhwa to stab and finish off the monsters as well. While checking his stats, Yujin notices an additional condition to unlock the skill, but there seems to be a typo in that. While Manhwa continues to stab the monsters, Yujin can only think about the typo he saw. Eventually, Manhwa manages to reach level 10, but doesn't unlock any skills. Following that, the Strankers ask if the two of them are done, and Yujin replies that he'd finish up soon. Suddenly, a pop-up saying, "Found him," and then apologizing appears in front of Yujin, and just then, both Yerim and Yuyun lunge at him, managing to save him from the boss monster that just attacked. Yujin mentions how a D-rank boss shouldn't be able to attack like that, but then witnesses the original boss being bullied by an even bigger monster. But even when the boss is defeated, The gate doesn't open, which means the new monster replaced the former boss. Yoon gives Yujin the gate stone to save himself if things get worse, reminding him of what happened the last time. This results in him refusing to take the stone, telling Yoon that the monster is weaker than him. Apparently, it is as strong as an A-rank monster, and its weak point seems to be the back of its head. He advises to leave its wings alone as they can be regenerated. As the boss zooms towards them, Yujin asks Yurim to create a barrier, and after she is done, he tells Yuyan to fight the bird. But before leaving, Yuyan asks Yurim to keep Yujin safe and makes sure to hand over the gate stone to Yujin. With that being said, Yuyan dashes towards the bird, resisting its fire attacks. The bird dives down to attack with its beak, but Yuyan dodges it and ends up landing a hit on its wings. Yujin can't believe that he ignored his advice, and the bird whips out its backup wings, flies in the air, and attacks Yuyan. Yujin begins to wonder why Yuyan stays on the ground and doesn't leap to take out the head. The bird then begins soaring towards the three of them, causing them to leak a few drops. Yurim holds onto her barrier as the bird prepares to attack. They all begin to panic, but luckily, Yuyan uses one of his skills named Blue Willows that surround the bird with feathers, only for him to stand there like an idiot. Yujin yells at him that he is supposed to step on the feathers. Yuyan takes the first step and is surprised to see that it can actually work. He then begins running around the bird while being in the air. This causes the bird to attack him with fire, but zooms through it and manages to land a brutal blow on the bird's back, making sure to stab the bird's head, causing a massive explosion. The three of them start freaking out, and eventually the bird falls to the ground. Yuyan then steps down, looking like a majestic being unlike his ugly 5'2" brother. Yujin comes running at him, and Yuyan praises him for teaching him a new skill. Yurim decides to not intervene as he eliminated the boss, while Yujin realizes how Yuyan looks like a kid who got his first win in Fortnite. After getting out of the dungeon, people begin to question the S-rankers as they saw the gate color change, while Yujin tries to keep his distance from those popular kids. Just then, the ripped fellow dashes towards Yujin, calling out his name, and slides in front of Yujin, asking if he is alright. But he reassures him that everything is alright, while Manhwa stands there alone, contemplating his lack of friends. At night, Yujin visits Yuyan's apartment with a bunch of drinks and finds out that he is taking a bath. Yujin decides to go and play with Peace, only to get absolutely assaulted by that little cute thing. After he is done playing with Peace, Yujin thinks about everything that happened that day, including the typo in the system and weird pop-ups. This makes him wonder if this is happening because he went back in time, causing things to happen before they were supposed to. He then begins complaining about the system for not being user-friendly. He taps on the custodian skill that makes a giant book appear out of nowhere. Elsewhere, some other known beings are talking about how they couldn't give Yujin more thorough information due to lack of time. They made a book about people under his custody, hoping he'd get the meaning behind it. Back in the real world, Yujin takes a better look at the book and notices that it only includes S-rank who are under his custody, along with 50 blank spots. Just then, Yuyan appears and notices that Yujin looks a bit pale, unaware that is tasked with taming 50 S-rankers. Peace has been training against other monsters and has grown nearly double in the past 2 days. Yujin tries hugging Peace after the training, and Peace's joyful ambush turns out to be brutal. Luckily, Yujin has borrowed some expensive equipment that keeps him from getting hurt. Last night, Yujin made an excuse, telling Yuyan that a new skill popped up after he reached level 10, which is an S-rank monster taming skill. Yuyan freaks out after hearing about it and gets ready to lock his scrawny brother down. But Yujin argues that they should exploit this skill so every hunter can have mounts. This will allow hunters to flawlessly clear all the dungeons and change the paradigm of dungeon raids. In the present, he continues to train Peace in the best possible way, eventually getting tired and mocking himself for thinking that it'll be easy. Just then, Shimyeon pays Yujin a visit, reassuring him that he's not there to kick him out of the gym. He praises Yujin for teaching Peace so much using his skill and bows his head down in front of him. Shimyeon apologizes for all the times he has called Yujin a bottom-tier freeloader and lets out his inner zesty personality, which seems like the two of them are playing to Peace. However, Yujin remembers how rude Shimyeon used to be to him in the past, but right now, he is willing to provide everything so Yujin can do well at his job. This makes Yujin realize that currently is the boss. Shimyeon then tries making Yujin sign a contract with the guild, but he wants to sign it as general staff instead of as a hunter. Apparently, he plans to work as a freelancer and provide his services to other guilds in order to get more cheddar. Yujin further mentions that he is literally a goose that lays golden eggs, and if he works for their guild alone, the other guild would want to get rid of him, which is why he wants to offer them his services in exchange for assuring his safety. But they can get dibs on his first and make arrangements with the other guilds. Shimyang laughs at him for being a pesky little fellow and decides to make a video to show to the other guilds. He then asks Yujin if he'd sign a contract with Haeyeon if they become the best in the country, only to realize that he has been filming it as proof. As Shimyang is leaving, Yujin mentions that there's no point in recruiting him as he doesn't have much to offer. This makes Shimyang realize that Yujin thinks very little of himself when he's a big deal. While Yujin celebrates this with peace, Shimyang wonders how he didn't recognize such a talent before. However, he already foresaw the challenges the other guilds would present, but if Yujin becomes a freelancer, everything will be his own to handle, making Shimyang think he did it because of Yuhyun. Meanwhile, the other guild masters watch the video of Yujin taming Peace and find it pretty interesting. Later, Yujin is done building Peace's new home in his dorm room when the other two pay him a visit, surprised to see Peace. At the same time, Yuhyun appears and asks to talk to Yujin privately, letting him know that the other guild masters are coming to meet him. Yuhyun mentions that it'll be hard for a rat like him to talk to those big dogs and decides to send them away, but is stopped by Yujin. He says that every guildmaster visiting their guild will boost their popularity and that he has to meet them in person to make a deal. Eventually, the two of them appear in the meeting room where all the guildmasters are present. The Resist Fear skill stops Yujin from becoming a nervous wreck, and Hunter asks to see Yujin's arm in order to get an appraisal of his skills. Yujin panics as it is a made-up skill and tells the hunter that he is not into men. Getting an appraisal can expose his other skills, making Yuhyun lock him up. As the hunter continues to persist, Peace gets angry and attacks the hunter with goofy ass hair. Everyone who saw this realized that the cub detected an attempt to use a skill on its master. Simultaneously, a guild master, Humana, approaches Yujin, saying that they won't need that appraisal after seeing how Peace acted. She then asks him to take a seat, while Yujin notices how she is twice his size, wondering if Yurim will become like that in the future. Hyuna then asks Yuhyun to hand them another cub if he finds any, but Yuhyun replies that he'd want a monster with frost resistance in exchange. Hyuna figures that he wants a mount for Yurim as well and Supwon. Another guild master begins yelling at Yuhyun for wanting more when he has been buying all the current available ones. Yuhyun says that he is willing to swap if they find any more, making him even more furious as he thinks Yuhyun wants them to play fetch for his guild. He then targets Yuhyun, saying that he'd obviously only care for his brother's guild. But Yuhyun replies that Haeyeon guild will only be his partner, and he wouldn't have set up a meeting if he only wanted to help his brother's guild. His reply makes Supwon stop his mindless yapping. Yujin further says that every guild master in the room will get first dibs on a few mounts, which is already a good enough deal. Hyuna compliments Yujin for being able to even tame idiots with his mouth, and offers Yujin to join her guild in a rather arousing fashion. But seeing his little brother furious in the background, he says that he'd only join Haeyeon if they became the best in the country. This makes Tunch intervene, asking if he can buy him out. Yujin remembers that his guild is currently the best in the country and wonders why he decided to talk at this point. In the end, Yujin only decides to join other guilds if they become the best in the world, making Hyuna crack up due to the confidence of a weakling like him. Yujin realizes that he is like a clueless shrimp surrounded by whales, as S-rank are pretty intimidating even when they are smiling, making him wonder how Yuhyun survived amongst them for so long. One of the guild masters calls Yujin a lot milder than his little brother, and Yujin replies that there is nothing wrong with Yuhyun as he is most probably the nicest one out of all of them. His reply makes everyone a bit shocked, causing Yujin to wonder if he said something wrong. Yujin informs everyone that Yuhyun has been the best little brother. He used to always hug him, bring him presents on his birthday, and get into med school so Yujin didn't have to work that hard. After hearing this story, everyone burst out laughing, including Hanj, who was always so serious. Hyuna calls Yuhyun a jack for acting like an angel in front of his brother, making Yujin confront her for swearing at his brother. After everyone is done laughing, they get back to the deal, and Hyuna mentions that they have already decided most of the stuff. Yujin takes a look at the contract and reads something about a building under his possession. Hyuna figures that Shimyang hasn't told him yet, and the chairman elaborates that they'll contract a building where Yujin can breed the creatures. Yujin thanks Shimyeon for being such a Chad, and reads the rest of the agreement, which includes the building's security and Yujin's ownership of the building. Yuyeon tells Yujin that all they need is his sign and notices the ugly smirk on his face, which the broke boy finds hard to remove. He can't believe he'd own his personal building in Seoul, and thinks of how all the whales made him a happy shrimp. He begins planning to make a workshop for Manhwa, and even invites Han to do her research there. Furthermore, he begins thinking about himself becoming a rich and popular freelancer, but is brought back to reality when the guild masters say their goodbyes to Yujin before leaving. After they leave, Yuyeon tells Yujin not to take anything the other guild masters said, to which he agrees. Following that, he compliments Peace for behaving so nicely, and is glad that everything went well. Back at the dorm, Manhwa makes dinner for him, saying that he deserves all this tasty food for his efforts. Afterward, Yujin asks Manhwa to pack up, as he'd be leaving soon, and before he can explain any further, Manhwa begins bawling, thinking that Yujin is kicking him out. He starts calling himself a useless F-ranker, and compares himself to Yujin, who stood up against those thugs and even gave valuable advice to Yuyeon. He then agrees with Yujin and decides to leave while Yujin desperately tries to stop him. He even tells Manhwa about his double S-rank skill, but Manhwa thinks of it as a lie to make him feel better. In the end, Yujin stops and says that he didn't know that this all was weighing on his mind. However, he makes sure to throw some bait about some information useful to Manhwa and says that he can't dump it on him if he doesn't want to know. Eventually, he lets Manhwa know that he heard about a special type of training for people like Manhwa from Han. Yujin brings a couple of kitchen knives for Manhwa, mentioning that his supporting skills are related to weapons, and asks him to sharpen those knives. As soon as he sharpens it, the counter for the remaining condition increases. Yujin further advises him to repeat this so he can unlock a new crafting skill. However, he'll need to grind about 10,000 of them. Manhwa starts beaming with joy after hearing about it and mentions how he will grind 100 knives per day to complete the task in 100 days. Yujin is happy to see his determination and later pays Han a visit. She is overjoyed to talk to Yujin about her research and starts blabbering non-stop. They then start talking about dungeons, and Yujin mentions how there are not enough dungeons in Korea to research. Han agrees and comments on how other countries don't let foreigners research their dungeons. Yujin remembers that this is why Han goes to the USA in the future and ends up finding the principle behind the formation of dungeons. Following that, Han shows him buckwheat jelly, as according to many people, it attracts KB. Apparently, it is a famous hunter who can teleport, but their identity is unknown and will remain unknown in the future. They can go anywhere with the teleportation ability and manage to save people from a crashing plane once. Other times, Dakiba has been entering the bases of terrorists, dodging their bullets and fighting them using her teleport abilities. Dakiba was practically impossible to catch due to their ability, as they just wanted to roam free without belonging to a single nation, which is why Han figured that Dakiba knew a lot about dungeons all around the world and found a blog about them liking buckwheat. Just then, the power suddenly goes out, and while Yujin turns on the flashlight of his phone, he notices a very terrified expression on Han's face. Yujin seems confused for a moment, only to find a horrifying ghost standing behind him. Han passes out instantly while Yujin begins to panic. Luckily, resist fear calms him down, and he realizes that it must be Dakebi. This results in Dakebi revealing themselves, saying that they came to honor Han's wishes. He then checks out their skills and realizes that he can use his skills on Dakebi. If he manages to pull it off, Han can make that discovery about dungeons while being in Korea. He starts off by telling Dakiba that their pranks are pretty awful, which makes them frustrated, as Yujin was totally pissing his pants. The Dakiba then begins making fun of Yujin, and he remembers that Dakiba likes to prank people and ends up betting that Dakiba can't scare him. The next morning, Han wakes up in a hospital and asks Yujin if Dakiba is gone. Yujin makes fun of their Walmart Halloween costume and gets no reply, proving that Dakiba is gone. But Han is a bit disappointed, as she wanted to ask some questions, but Yujin reassures her that he'll be able to help. Han thinks that Yujin might join her team, but he disagrees, saying he can provide her information. This reminds him of last night when he asked Dakiba to serve him if he won, and the opposite if Dakiba did. This results in Dakiba laughing, as the only thing in F-rank is good at is Minecraft. Dakiba wants Yujin to serve them for 20 years if they win, and Yujin surprisingly agrees. However, Dakibi finds it a bit suspicious that Yujin is willing to go that far for a wager, and Yujin thinks of an excuse, figuring that the resist fear skill will surely make him the victor. Eventually, he tells Dakibi that he is a massive fanboy of theirs, as the way they save people and fight criminals impresses him. This results in Dakibi grinning in a creepy manner and praising themselves for being so awesome. In the end, Dakibi accepts the wager and says that they'd scare him 3 times, and if he remains calm, he wins. Back in the present, Yujin tells Heian that he'd provide her with information, and if she comes up with a theory regarding dungeon generation, the two of them will split the profit equally. But Heian begins doubting her skills, and Yujin reassures her that she is the only one who can do it. Following that, Yujin makes a bet that there will be slimes or coastal settings in the new dungeon they just found. Heian is impressed that Yujin is able to predict those things, not knowing he's from the future. He then says that if he is right about the dungeon, then she'll accept his offer. After that, he leaves her room while wondering if he said a little too much. A few days later, Dakibi in the form of a creepy granny tries scaring Yujin but fails. The next time, Dakibi tried grabbing his foot, which made him onto the ground. But all he did was yell at Dakibi for hurting him and didn't get scared. Now for the last chance. Yujin has his eyes on Manhwa's grimace shake when a pretty terrifying doll appears in front of them. But as he looks back, he finds Dakibi in the form of a ghost. However, it still doesn't scare him, but Manhwa, who is also in the kitchen, sharpening his knives, scares the living shit out of Dakibi. Manhwa then looks at the Dakibi and ends up passing out instantly, and with that, Dakibi loses. Do you think Yujin will be able to make the Dakibi reveal all the information about the dungeon? Comment Hunters if you'd like a part 2 of this series. As usual, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next one.